Welcome to Chapter 5 of Project Management course, PMP. In this chapter, we're going to cover all that entails about the project management or about the project, the scope of the project. Now, we're going to examine key concepts surrounding this knowledge area, project scope management. We're going to examine the processes under this knowledge area. The processes under this knowledge area are plan scope management, collect requirements, define scope, create work breakdown structure, validate scope, and control scope. So we have to first of all start by identifying the concepts that describe this knowledge area to the vividly. We have the definition of scope, and scope is defined in two dimensions or broken down into two. We have product scope and project scope. Now, the term product scope refers to the features and functions or functionalities that characterize a product, service, or result, while the project scope refers to the work performed to deliver a product, service, or result with the specified features and functions. So the project scope usually includes product scope in its entirety. And you can picture this as kind of like scope is defined as, it could be seen as what is included, what is not included, the boundary between what is included and what should not be included in the project, kind of like the perimeters. The scope of a product refers to the features of that product, the features and functionalities that characterize the product. And it's very important we understand scopes, product scope and project scope. Here, a requirement, like in the definition of project management, which is project management is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities to meet project requirements. Requirement is a condition or capability that is required to be present in a product, service, or result to satisfy a condition or formally imposed condition. All right, so the project scope statement, or rather the project scope management. Project scope management is actually the processes of, or the project scope management is all about the processes that are required for defining what work is required and then making sure that all that work and only that work is completed. Okay, so only the work that is required. So project scope is talking about the work that is required to be done and only that work. Product scope is talking about the features and functionalities of the product or result or deliverable. Okay. Furthermore, we have key terms like requirements traceability metrics. We're going to get all of that along the course. It is agreed that links product requirements from their origin to the deliverables that satisfy them. We're going to get more about that later. We have work breakdown structure. It's a hierarchical decomposition of the total scope of the work. Work breakdown structure dictionary is a document that provides detailed deliverable activity and scheduling information about each component in the work breakdown structure. Scope baseline refers to the approved version of the scope statement, work breakdown structure, and its associated work breakdown structure dictionary. So there are three elements in scope baselining. The scope baseline is so important in project management because it is the basis from which all other baselines of schedule and costs are formulated or established. The scope creep is a concept or is a terminology that is applicable to when projects experience uncontrolled expansion in the project scope without adjustment to time, cost, or resources. So the ever expanding nature of work could lead to scope creep. Decomposition is a technique that you'll find in this chapter. Very interesting. Decomposition is the technique used for dividing and subdividing the project scope and deliverables into smaller, more manageable parts or components. So in the decomposition, which is actually the key function of this chapter, decomposition, that's breaking down the product or the project scope into the smallest parts that would enable the project team to manage them through activities in the project management plan. There is a rule called the 100% rule that says the total of the work at the lowest levels of the work breakdown structure should roll up to the higher level so that nothing is left out and no extra work is performed. So meaning that if you are going to break down your project scope right down to what we call work package levels, if you sum all the work packages upwards from bottom to up, you should have 100% completion of the entire or whole project work or scope. Control account is a management control point where scope, budget, and schedule are integrated and compared to earned value for performance comparison. Work package is the lowest level of work breakdown structure component. The planning package also is a work breakdown structure component below the control account and above the work package. We're going to see the picture of that shortly. Now, under this chapter, we would look at trends. We'll study trends and emerging practices. In fact, our study is actually categorized in this way. We have definition, we have the meaning of project scope management and key terms, trends and emerging practices, then tailoring considerations, and considerations for adaptive environments. Trends and emerging practices refer to what are the innovations, what are the current ways or the latest practices that surround this knowledge area or chapter. It entails collaborating with a business analyst. Now, you understand the role of the business analyst in the project is that he works in collaboration with the project team or project manager to define project requirements, collect those requirements, document those requirements, elicit the requirements, and of course, define the scope of the project effectively. So business analysts are people who look at the solutions, the solution requirements, what the product or what the project is to deliver, what value. So business analysis covers all of that aspect. And in this chapter, it is really a specialist chapter for business analysts working with the project manager because it's all about defining the scope, collecting the requirements, making sure that the project is properly baseline, and that is it. So the trends and emerging practices are that business analysts are working in collaboration with project managers to determine problems and identify business needs, identify and recommend viable solutions for meeting those needs, and elicit, document, and manage stakeholder requirements in order to meet objectives, facilitate the successful implementation of the product, service, or result. So business analysis, the work of a business analyst comes way before that of the project manager or the project team. So business analysts are people who actually initiate or pre-initiate a project before handing over to the project manager. And then in pre-initiating the project, it means they define the project, shape, structure the project in terms of its deliverables, value to be derived, and the outputs, benefits management or realization management. And then they structure the project and the output of the project, and then they develop a benefits realization management system in such a way that they will realize the outputs or benefits of that project and integrate it into the service environments or transition into operations as the case may be. So business analysts are looking forward to the benefits, the value of the project. And by this, they are concerned with this chapter because this is a specialist domain for analyzing the deliverable, that's the product scope, and the work that is required in terms of cost benefits of embarking on the volume of work versus the value that the work has to deliver to the project. All right, so in that, they uncover problems, identify the business needs, and identify and recommend viable solutions to meeting those needs, and elicit, document, and manage stakeholder requirements in order to meet the objectives. They facilitate the successful implementation finally of the product, service, or result. That means they are involved in the oversight of benefits realization, shaping the output and driving the intended outcome for the project. Tailoring considerations in this chapter would involve knowledge and requirement management, validation and control, development approach, stability of requirements, governance. All right, so the next thing we look would be at considerations for adaptive environments. This chapter could entail that scope management principles that apply from the traditional perspective. They also would apply in agile environments or adaptive environments. Now, agile methods spend less time defining scope in the early stage. Very important. Agile methods spend more time establishing the process for its ongoing discovery and refinement. Most of the times, projects that are managed through the agile approach, they uncover their details, they develop it in such a way that more details are identified along the way in an iterative approach or manner. And also the deliverables are derivable through incremental uh, um, methods. Okay, so the more you execute the project, the more you get information, and then you replan, and then you go forward. So agile methods purposefully build and review prototypes and release versions to refine the requirements. Scope is defined and redefined throughout the project. That means scope is not just defined at once, unlike in the traditional approach of project management, where you have to define scope and then that is all. But in agile, scope is defined and redefined. Requirements constitute what we call the backlog. The backlog is a prioritized feature list. We are going to see all of that when you cover the chapter fully. Okay, looking at project scope management overall in terms of processes, we would have to look at the first process there, plan scope management. Of course, the second process is collect requirements. Third process is define scope, and the fourth is create work breakdown structure, and then the fifth is validate scope, and the sixth is control the scope. Now let's start with the plan scope management. Plan scope management, you have to study it by defining it first of all, what it is, plan scope management, and then we look at the key benefits of this process. Why do you have to plan scope management? The planning of scope management is the process of defining or actually documenting the procedures for how scope is going to be defined and validated and controlled throughout the project. Okay, so that is definition and benefit as well. Now, if we look at okay, the process of creating a scope management plan that documents how the project and product scope will be defined, validated, and controlled. That is just it. All right, so the data flow diagram shows inputs, excuse me here. All right, so we continue. We are looking at the data flow diagram here for plan scope management. At the inputs, we have the project charter coming out from develop project charter under integration, and it comes in as an input to plan scope management. So you need the project charter to plan the scope management. You need the project management plan, which contains quality management plan, project life cycle description, and development approach to plan the scope management. Now, why is quality management necessary? It is very necessary because quality relates with scope. Now, the quality details uh, the features, the characteristics of the product, the quality of the product, the standards, and the standards that have to be maintained for that product to become functional and usable. So that is the quality. And it relates with scope because if a high quality product will require a lot of effort of scope to realize it. Okay, so the same goes with the project lifecycle selection or description. The type of life cycle that the project adopts would also determine the amount of effort of scope required to execute that project through that life cycle. And same with the development approach, whether it's hybrid, uh, waterfall to iterative to agile, and then finally predictive, or whatever combination. So then the enterprise EF factors and OPF factors count as well. So you interact that with the tools and techniques and you come out with the project scope or the scope management plan as it is, plus the requirements management plan. The inputs, you have the project charter, the project management plan, the EF and OPA. Tools and techniques of plan scope management, you have expert judgment, data analysis, and meetings. Plan scope management outputs are two. You have the scope management plan and requirements management plan. Very important. The second process in this knowledge area is collect requirements. So after you plan the scope, how the scope will be uh, defined, that's the product scope and the project scope will be defined, how they will be uh, validated and how they'll be controlled is under plan scope management. That is the documentation. And then collect requirements becomes the second process. And collect requirements is about determining, documenting, managing stakeholder needs and requirements to meet the project objectives. And you have the data flow diagram there, what goes into plan scope or rather collect requirements, and what goes out. So the project charter comes in to collect the requirements. Remember, this is the primary document at the beginning or creation of the project. The primary project document, actually, because you have pre-documents that gave rise to the project charter, the business documents, which houses the business case and the benefits management plan. But then the project charter is the primary document from the creation of the project, or rather the primary project document, because you have business documents and you have project documents. Okay, so I'm trying to make sure the terminologies are well understood. The primary project document, the first project document that a project has from its creation, is the project charter. Meanwhile, the first document that a project has either is a business document, or the first document before the initiation of a project is actually the business documents. The business documents include the business case and the benefits management plan. All right, so we look at the inputs here. The project charter comes in. We have the project management plan also coming in to collect requirements, because the project management plan has the requirements management plan, which we already identified that under plan develop project management plan. Okay, so that process under integration, you have the project management plan, which contains the requirements management plan, scope management plan, and stakeholder engagement plan. These are the three plans that would be required to collect requirements at that level. Then you have project documents like assumption log, lessons learned register, and stakeholder register. All these move together with the business documents for you to collect requirements effectively. This is very important. Agreements is part of it, and EF and OPA. Collecting requirements is one of the biggest scope efforts in project management. So you apply a lot of techniques. Of course, the output of collect requirements is requirements documented or documentation, and requirements traceability metrics. So you collect requirements and diagram them or formulate them into a matrix where you can trace those requirements, link them to their features and functionalities in the product. Then we definitely just flash through again the inputs of this process are project charter, project management plan, project documents, business documents, agreements, EF and OPA. You can see the difference between project documents and business documents, okay? Tools and techniques of this process are very elaborate, and I like them because this is where your project, gets the best capture. Okay, it's like you took the best camera to capture the best shots, the best features, the 360-degree features, what do you call panoramic view of the product. Okay, and you have to understand um, all the techniques and tools here because they are very vital in the exam. The expert judgment, good. Data gathering techniques, you have brainstorming interviews, focus groups, questionnaires and surveys, benchmarking. Of course, we are accustomed to this. When you are collecting information, you definitely use, you're conducting research, you definitely could use interviews, questionnaires and surveys, focus groups, and all of that. Data analysis. Data analysis. Data analysis would include document analysis. Then we have decision making. The three most essential decision making techniques you have are voting, autocratic decision making, and multi-criteria decision analysis. Now, voting has three methods there. You have unanimity, majority, and plurality. You have to understand them very well there in the text. Data representation, you use affinity data. So after you've collected the requirements, okay, through data collection tools and techniques, you now have to represent that data in the format that you would use it effectively to define the scope of the project. Okay, so the format for data representation would be affinity diagrams. Affinity diagram is kind of like grouping, grouping thoughts and requirements that are similar into one stock. Okay, mind mapping. Mind mapping, we're going to get all of that. Interpersonal and team skills, nominal group technique, observation, conversation, job shadowing, facilitation. Facilitation techniques could, under interpersonal and team skills, will include joint application development, quality function deployment, procure FD, user stories. These are very important. Context diagram and prototypes. You have to study this very well. Okay. Collect requirements, output, business requirements, stakeholder requirements, solution requirements, like functional requirements, non-functional requirements, and then transition and readiness requirements, project requirements, quality requirements. Think about it. You have now collected your requirements and you have them as requirements documentation. And the requirements documentation is made up of business requirements, stakeholder requirements, solution requirements, transition and readiness requirements, project requirements, quality requirements. And requirements traceability metrics is another output. Okay. Define scope. First thing first is to define the scope. What is the definition of defined scope as a process? Is the process of developing a detailed description of the project and product. So scope is about product and project. The inputs, you have the project charter, project management plan, scope, project documents, and EF and OPA. There you use techniques and tools like expert judgment, data analysis, decision making, interpersonal and team skills, and product analysis. So this is when you are trying to detail the description of the project and the product. So you need expert judgment, data analysis. Data analysis could entail alternative analysis. Now in collection, you were using the data analysis technique for collect requirements. You were using document analysis. See, you analyze a document to come up with requirements. But in defining the scope now, you use alternatives analysis. That means you're able to see what are the alternatives to define this scope. Decision making, multi-criteria decision analysis, where you have, we'll see that in the text, of course. Interpersonal and team skills, facilitation, product analysis. All right, so the output of this process, defined scope, is the project scope statement. This is the most important as well. Project scope statement entails the product scope description, deliverables, acceptance criteria, and project exclusions. So the project exclusions are to guard against scope creep. Scope creep is the phenomenon of uncontrolled expansion of the project scope. Uncontrolled. It is not tied to the scope baseline. So the project scope statement is vital so that you can know what the product and the project really is and what it is not, and what should not be included. There you have the business. Okay, another output there is project documents updated. So the project scope statement is made up of product scope description, deliverables, acceptance criteria, and project exclusions. Now, we have to examine a kind of analogy versus comparative in a project charter and project scope statement. The project charter versus the project scope statement, you can see that there are similar things there, but there is a subtle difference. Okay. The project charter, for example, has the project purpose. The project scope statement has the project scope description, measurable project objectives and related success criteria. You have project deliverables, acceptance criteria. It just looks almost the same, but it's not the same. You have to just know. It's project scope statement is a refinement of the project charter's content. Okay. High level requirements, high level project description, boundaries and key deliverables, overall project risk, summary milestone schedule, pre-approved financial resources, key stakeholder list. This is what is contained in the project charter. Okay, so key stakeholder list, project approval requirements, project exit criteria, assign project manager responsibility and authority level, name and authority of the sponsor or other person authorizing the project charter. Now you have the project scope statement made up of project scope description, project deliverables, acceptance criteria, project exclusions, assumptions, constraints. Create work breakdown structure. This is the fourth process. First process was plan scope management. Second process, collect requirements. Third process, define scope. Fourth process now, create work breakdown structure. And it is the process of subdividing and dividing the project deliverables and project work into smaller, more manageable components. The technique that you use there is what? We saw something, decomposition. Good. All right. So we can actually trace the summary flow diagram here, which entails inputs and outputs. We have at the input there, project management plan. We have project documents, and we have EF and OPA. Then at the output, we have the scope baseline and the assumptions and requirements documentation. Okay, so the scope baseline now is another very final key. Okay, very, very final key. Okay, so you see an example of a work breakdown structure there, decomposing the work into more manageable work package components. At that level, you can actually manage the project properly, know how to do estimations, know how to do budgeting, know how to do risk analysis on each of the component level work. So you have needs assessment, standards development, systems engineering, project management. Of course, it comes down at layers 1.1.1 and then comes down to 1.1.1.1 and 0.2, 1.31, all of that. Then comes down again, breaks down. So each level details the scope down further to refined levels that are easily managed or manageable. Okay, so you should take note, the work package is the lowest level in the work breakdown structure. Then you have control account, which are above the planning package. Okay, the planning package is in between the work package and the control account. The control account is a management account, an inspection point, for example, where performance measurements could be taken, where details and track records of performance of the project can be obtained. So it's a control account. One control account can serve many work packages below it. Okay, now the output of work breakdown structure is what? The scope baseline. The scope baseline includes the project scope statement, work breakdown structure, and work breakdown structure dictionary. Well, you can as well add this one, work package and planning package. The scope baseline is the approved version of the project scope that can only be changed through a formal change control process, and it is the basis for which all estimates of schedule cost and resource allocation or even risk identification are tracked in the project. Work breakdown structure component is not the same as activity. Absolutely correct. Because the work breakdown structure comes down, the last level is called a work package. A work package is the elemental small uh, less portion of the work of the project that can be assigned to a project team member, and characteristics of it are unique as a work unit. Now, when we are going to move into schedule and cost, we're going to see that they will take that same work package and break it further, decompose it further to activity levels, activities. So activity list of activities, right? And the attributes of those activities. And then they'll be able to run estimates based on that and calculate all that budget or cost and schedule requirements. Okay, here we have the work breakdown structure. Deliverables is deliverables oriented. Okay, so work is technically broken down, not just that you just take a hammer and hit and scatter the work. It has a technical, logical breakdown approach, and each breakdown structure should relate to the deliverable, because the deliverable is the goal point in the management approach for the project. Each work package should consist of nouns, that's deliverables, not actions or activities. Further breakdown of work package into activities is done as part of defined activities process in schedule management. All right, we would hit the fifth process, which is validate scope. Validate scope is the process of formally or formalizing the acceptance of the completed project deliverables. Formalizing acceptance of the completed project deliverables. Let me just retrospect you a little bit. We find in under integration, direct and manage project work as a process under execution. Now, that process produces an output called deliverable. As work is being executed, of course, the deliverables come out. The deliverables that come out, first of all, go through a process under quality control called control quality, and they check it for defects and quality, whether it passes the quality uh, uh, assurance test, whatever, quality control test, or the quality standards that was defined by the organization or by the customer. Okay, good. If that process is okay, the deliverable is called now verified deliverable as an output of control quality. Now that verified deliverable moves straight to validate scope. It is here that it comes in as an input called verified deliverable to validate scope. After scope is validated, you will now have it at the output of validate scope called accepted deliverable. So that is why the scope validation process is called the formalization of accepted deliverables. So I hope the diagram is in your mind through the description I'm giving. But nevertheless, let's push a little bit the buttons forward and we can see where, if possible, the explanation will come closer. Now, validate scope flow diagram. Oof, you have the inputs and the outputs. All right, so at the input level, you have oof, you have project management plan, good. You have work performance data. You have control quality giving you verified deliverables. Are you seeing the input there? The input there, verified deliverables. So where is it coming from? It's coming, deliverables first of all come from where? It comes out at manage and direct project work. Then it comes to verify, to quality, control quality. Control quality gives it out as verified deliverables. So verified deliverables move into validate scope process. I see. So you validate the scope now by bringing the verified deliverables before the customer, and the customer checks it and say, yes, 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 this meets what I said. This is what, you know. So they accept it formally and sign off. The customer signs off and say that is okay. Then the project can continue. So each time a deliverable comes out, they go through a quality control check process and comes out and move to the customer straight, and the customer validates it, or whoever is authorized to validate it. Good. They validate and sign off, and then they continue to another phase. Very important. Here you have accepted deliverables at the output, and when the deliverables come out at the output of validate scope, they are going straight to close project or phase. In fact, that is, so validate scope is the near end process in the whole or entire project management process framework. So you have validate scope as the near end, the ultimate process to close project or phase. Then you have perform integrated change control. You have change requests there. You have work performance information, and so on. All right. All right. What do we say? Control scope is the final SIF process in the scope management knowledge area. So we can define control scope as the process of monitoring the status of the project and product scope and managing changes to the scope baseline. The process of monitoring the status of the project and product scope and managing changes to the scope baseline. That means the idea here is to avoid the uncontrolled change or any change that will impact on scope baseline. Is a terrible change, because once the scope baseline is altered, the entire project is altered. That means the blueprint has changed. It's now a different story. It's a different project entirely. So that's why the eye of the project manager and team are on control scope as much as possible to avoid unnecessary changes to scope baseline. Because once the scope baseline is affected, it will affect every other parameter in the project management framework, like the schedule, the cost, all the estimates that were based on the scope baseline will ultimately have to be changed. Once, so therefore, scope control process is so vital, and that is the relevance of it or the key benefit. Okay, now at the input level of that process, you can see the scope management plan, requirements management plan, change management plan, configuration management plan, scope baseline, performance measurement baseline. Of course, project documents like lessons learned, register, requirements documentation, traceability, metrics, all come in. And then work performance data is also a work-in input into that process. Tools and techniques, data analysis, and you have variance analysis and trend analysis. Variance analysis is a technique of comparing actual to what was initially planned. Okay, what was planned may be different from what we obtain now at a particular point T. So variance analysis is the difference between what we have now versus what we were supposed to have. Then trend analysis talks about measuring performance, structure, variation over time. Maybe how is performance like? How is the project performing over the past 3 months? You take a trend analysis and you see, is it bubbling up? Is it bubbling down? Is it zigzagging and all of that, so that they can interpret what measures to put in place to put the project on a smooth path. Okay, control scope output. You would have WPI, change requests, updates to project management plan and documents updates. All right, so um, just look backward now. We'll just kind of like, let's review the chapter. We have come to an end, but let's just see some key terms like collect requirements process. The output is traceability metrics. Requirements traceability metrics is a grid that links product requirements from their origin to the deliverables that satisfy them. It provides a mean to track requirements throughout the project lifecycle, and metrics helps to ensure that requirements approved in requirements documentation are delivered at the end of the project. Attributes associated with each requirement can be recorded in the requirements traceability matrix. You see an example there. Create work breakdown structure. You definitely have the WBS approach. Commercial, there are commercial softwares, templates for work breakdown structure. So it could be automated. It's not just a ledger and pen approach. All right, so, nice question there. Who can answer that? You are the project manager for an advertising campaign. The stakeholders, including the client, approved your completed work breakdown structure. Later, after some of the artwork has been printed, the client wants to add a registered trademark symbol, which will cost a considerable amount of money. The client says that your company salesperson, prior to sign off on the WBS, promised this feature would be included. Who should pay for the change? A, the company managing the project. B, both the client and your company should pay part of the cost. C, the change should not be implemented. D, the client. That's a typical question on what they call scope validation. Okay, all right, sign off. You answer it. It's very simple. I won't give you the answer so that you can reflect a bit. If you can't get the answer, we would check it next time. All right. Thank you so much. We've come to the end of this chapter, and I wish you the best in your study. Go through the chapter, understand all the key processes, ask yourself what is the application behind all this knowledge area, and then you are going to take some chapter tests. So ensure that you score very high in your chapter test. Okay. Thank you, and see you next class. Next class will be the chapter on schedule management. All right, thank you.